Hi, I'm Chris Thompson. I'm a product of 12-step recovery for over 18 years. During that time, I've worked with many addiction sufferers, mostly in 12-step programs, and I've concluded the biggest barrier to maintaining sobriety in 12-step is resistance to the requirement of a higher power. For most, the migration from treatment to 12-step cannot be an icy plunge from the cerebral to the spiritual. Instead, it must be a warm handoff that leverages the thinking retraining begun in treatment with a shift to the benefits of spiritual thinking without first necessarily identifying a spiritual source for that thinking. I call this inductive approach of moving from spiritual effects to their possible cause, reverse engineering your higher power. I'm producing a series of videos from my lectures that show how this reverse engineering process can work in replacing disturbance with peace in the lives of addiction sufferers. Subscribe to this channel, and every other week see a 2-minute video about how that process can happen for you. But first, I encourage you to watch this longer video called The Thinking Problem Revisited, which takes A, literature and other subject areas and remaps them to give a different perspective on the addiction sufferer's thinking problem.
Welcome to the series, Reverse Engineer Your Higher Power. But first, an introduction. The Thinking Problem Revisited. There are many profound questions to ask in this human experience. Let's consider 3 in the context of addiction. Question 1. What is our world? The world is the sum total of our experience and how we perceive it. The boundaries of our world are determined by our consciousness. It can be as expansive as our imagination will allow it, perhaps the planet and even beyond, or as contracted as our fears require it, perhaps limited to just our comfortable interactions. However we define our world, there is one constant. Our world's based on form, which is sensory perception interpreted by the brain. For most of us, what we call knowing is external stimuli filtered by observation. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, first published in 1939, provides a cautionary warning about this level of understanding. From the chapter We Agnostics on page 48, it is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. This idea is simply expressed today as observation depends on the observer, a principle fundamental to both quantum physics and Buddhism. The second question to ask ourselves is, who am I? Our ego minds have a story about who we are based on our interpretation of the world as we experience it. But the self is just one point of observation. One thing is certain, though, the self is front and central to the world as perceived, and our world's events spin uncontrollably around each of us as we spin within it. The 12 steps and 12 traditions of AA concur. Page 24 calls the average, in this case alcoholic, self-centered in the extreme. Question 3, who are the others? The multitude of dots represent persons and encounters. These experiences are fraught with fear. To bring order and a sense of safety to this fearsome presence, the ego mind looks for affinity groups or tribes. Our socialization biases determine these groups. They start with family and school, and continue to friends and the workplace, and develop wherever like-minded persons are perceived institutionally and socially. And as always, with the I, trying to maintain the delusion, the world revolves around the self. These tribes are critical for bringing stability safety, and predictability to our world view. Our tribes become our vibes, and vice versa. The ego mind assigns affirming attributes to tribe members and projects dissociative attributes to outsiders, me and you, us and them, good and bad, right and wrong, in and out, like and dislike. As a result, the ego mind creates a world of duality. Everything is perceived as either for or against the self. The 12 and 12 calls this worldview warring fragments and notes on page 37, each fragment says to the others, we are right and you are wrong. These tribes or fragments are dynamic. Persons and experiences move in and out until eventually it seems the whole world is against the self. Nothing is certain anymore. The addict's world is disappearing. Eventually, even duality gives way to a singular and perpetual state of disturbance. The 12 and 12 agrees and says in step 1, we were in a continual state of disturbance and frustration. The 12 and 12 goes on further, and on page 90 assigns responsibility for disturbance to the only place where it matters. It is a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us. This passage is the killer app of AA and a game changer for recovery. Colloquially, this is expressed as, you spot it, you got it. Returning to the state of disturbance, it expresses itself in other dis-is: disapproval, disagreement, discord, disharmony, dispute, disassociation, disconnection, distemper, dis-ease, and many more. Eventually, the disses reduce to one, which becomes front and center to the self. At first, this dis-ease is the loss of ease emotionally, but eventually, loss of health bodily, hence the disease of addiction. Dr. Bob talks about it in his big book story, saying on page 178 he was ill at ease most of the time. My health was at the breaking point. Returning again to the duality view of the world, many persons are able to find balance among conflicting dual energies. It's often expressed as holding the tension of opposites. In author F. Scott Fitzgerald's essay called Crack Up, he writes, the test of a first-rate intelligence is to hold two opposing ideas simultaneously in the mind and still retain the ability to function. In Eastern thought, balancing thought and energies is called yin and yang. In addiction, it's called temperance. But the addiction sufferer is intemperate in most matters and only desires and accepts self-affirming energies. While seeking to fix, manage, and control external circumstances, the opposite occurs for the addict. They become weighed down by negative energies. So where does all this leave the addiction sufferer in this world with others? Perhaps no observation about addiction sufferers is more damning than the one made in the 12 and 12 discussion of the fourth step. The 12 and 12 asserts on page 53 of our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Here's how that separation might look in everyday life. Here's a towering sculpture rising above the landscape at Burning Man Festival. The two adults, with backs to each other, are having any number of dissing feelings. Yet, Ukrainian artist Alexander Milov calls this sculpture love, because the child within each, as yet unaffected by the duality of socialization, only seeks connection. It is this nature, love, the adults are born into. If this looks like disturbance, then what does peace look like? Here, on a similar landscape, is a face embodying joy. Before there can be the expression of joy, there must be inner peace, knowing all is as it should be. A peace that surpasses all understanding and is one with all the world. I leave you with this thought from the Big Book chapter, Into Action. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. With that said, I invite you to suspend judgment and think about the idea of a kingdom of heaven. Imagine it simply as a metaphor for a perfect state of being. Now consider this assertion in a well-known text. Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Perhaps we are not here in this world to learn as much as we are to remember. With this child as perspective, we now move from the thinking problem to the thinking solution.